If I was a newer developer, CS grad, bootcamp grad, learning how to code maybe, or even if I was a more senior developer who found myself on the market or was looking to transition into a new role, there are exactly three things I'd be studying right now. A few years ago, my advice to these same people would have been much different, especially people at the beginning of their career. For a long time, I've preached about technical mastery, learning the fundamentals, unit testing, system design, getting really good in your programming language of choice. And if I'm being honest, that advice feels good, like it feels good, but it doesn't feel right, right? It feels a little antiquated if I'm being completely honest. Now, obviously, you can't just not know how to code, right? That is table stakes stuff. I'm assuming you either have a degree or you went to a boot camp or you're self-taught or whatever, right? You know how to code enough, but that's not enough anymore to get hired, right? I really see that there are three levels of using AI that more developers need to get under their tool belt in order to be highly competitive on the market. The bar for what is hireable has really changed dramatically in the last few years. It used to be, can you build a full stack app? Or do you know React really well? Or do you know some sort of language and syntax really well? Can you traverse a binary tree or solve a linked list problem on a whiteboard? And do you have some connection to somebody within our organization, or did you do an internship? That world is far gone for the most part, right? That's just not the way people are really getting hired nowadays. So beyond the fundamentals, beyond just knowing how to code, here are the three things that I would invest a lot of time in because I really believe, and I've seen how they've helped me in my own career in this period, in this market, after I got laid off, going to a few startups, and then watching my popularity on the open market kind of explode. And I don't want to extrapolate too much from that experience, but I do think that there's something to be said there. It's obvious. The writing is on the wall. Companies expect you to know this stuff. So the first level of AI skills I'd want to get under my belt is just learning how to use the tools, right? This is either super simple for you and you can just skip past this part and go to the next chapter in this particular video or this podcast, however you're consuming this, you can just skip past this part. If you're already using Claude, if you're already using Cursor, if you already have some sort of workflow and you have opinions on Git worktrees or sub agents and all this kind of stuff, just skip right on past this part. But if you don't have opinions on these things, or you're not using Claude, you're not using Cursor, you're using Copilot or something like that, you'd really need to invest time and maybe even a little bit of money getting good at these tools. Your next interview is as likely to be, hey, keep the AI on and show us how you compose code with it, as it is to be, hey, traverse this binary tree, as it is to be, hey, let's write a React component together, or some combination of those things. I run a coding bootcamp, yes, even in 2026, and I've mentored tons of students, and I hear their interview horror stories, and I've heard all sorts of combinations of this right now. It's really, really difficult to get ready for an interview because it is all over the place right now. But if there's one constant thing I've seen, especially for more junior candidates, is that they really want to see how you're using AI tools. And you might think, oh, well, I'm just prompting Claude and it just one-shots the thing for me. Then no, you've lost the plot, my friend. You can't do that in an interview, and I've spoken about that in a previous video that'll be somewhere around here, where I talk about my interview where the CTO told me to leave Cursor on, and the interview actually got harder. Because now it's not enough to just prompt the thing and have it write the code. You need to understand why you're accepting things, why you're not accepting things. Where do you push back? Where do you not? How do you plan through a larger feature? What are the pitfalls from doing something like that? You can't just be a prompt monkey because, why would they be hiring you, right? Why would they be hiring a software engineer if you literally are just some dude who can prompt Claude? There's plenty of dudes on Twitter and X and Threads and all that kind of stuff that claim to do that all day long, and none of them are software developers. You should have some opinions about why you used one data structure over another one, why you used this object over another, why you used a hash map over an object, why you're going to use a state machine rather than a bunch of if-else statements or whatever, right? Have some opinions on these things. If the code looks really complex, make it super simple. Remember this, code is for humans, not machines. This is why we need humans to ultimately look over it, make sure it satisfies the requirements, and also is readable and understandable for future generations, right? Your code doesn't live in a microcosm. It isn't just going to go away ideally, right? It's not uncommon to work in a code base that might have code from 10 or even 20 years ago, right? And besides just being able to prompt effectively and get code that doesn't suck out of these AI tools, I think a really underrated skill that has to do with this is learning how to use Git well. Whether you're using Git worktrees or you're running multiple agents in different branches, like Just having a decent Git flow can really be helpful when you're using all these agents nowadays, especially work trees. So that's an underrated skill that is more traditional software engineering or kind of modern software engineering practices that you could take and apply to your agent workflow. And I think that's going to give you a lot more bang for your buck than just learning how to prompt better and better and better and learning all these like prompt hacks and things like that. I think that's a losing game. And remember this, the agent is really just an amplification of whatever your skills are. So if you are not good at prompting or you give it bad inputs, it's going to give you bad outputs, right? It's not an omniscient, all-knowing, super hyper good coder. It's just trained on a bunch of code. And so it's going to give you some distribution that's probably near average, right? It's never going to give you something mind-blowingly amazing, right? We still need humans for that innovation. So if you're still building up that muscle to understand what is good code, then I would still, this old antiquated advice, well, I guess it's not antiquated, but read books, right? Read clean code. Read about enterprise architecture patterns, right? Just read up on basic data structures and ways you might employ them. Read about things like the facade pattern, SRP, single responsibility principle, open closed principle. Just learn how some of these things might be applied practically, dependency injection, all these buzzwords and these kind of academic things that you hear that have real practical application. That way, when you look at really complex code, you can make it simpler, and then you also know which patterns might fit the problem that you're currently looking at. And then you really take the driver's seat when it comes to working with these agents. This is really level one stuff. And I think if you're doing most of this, you're already ahead of a lot of software engineers right now. Now, level two is where things get interesting, and this is where I see the most opportunity right now. And this is when you're building on top of AI, right? You're not building the models, you're not tweaking the weights or working on super complex mathematical things. Instead, you're building things like MCP servers to help out your company or your team do stuff in Claude, or you're exposing some sort of data to another person's MCP server, or you're building something that might include RAG, retrieval augmented generation. You're building agents. Every other company, or maybe every single company right now, is basically being bullied into doing this by their investors, right? They're feeling this top-down pressure from people, from their investors, from their CTO, from really everybody to incorporate AI in some ham-fisted way, right? And whether you believe in it or you think it's smart or not, this is the reality. There are some really good use cases and there's some, not so great use cases out there. But the reality is your company almost certainly is going to be building something that involves agents, MCP, or RAG, or probably all three. So if you are learning how to build those things, maybe you're building a small MCP server on your own on the weekend, or you're doing something like the project in the show notes, hint, hint, that you can grab to learn about RAG, retrieval augmented generation, this is a really magical time because it's so new. This technology is new enough. There's few people that know it well that you can get in really early and say, hey, you know what? I actually do know how to build something that involves a RAG pipeline. And here's the pitfalls. Here's some choices we could have. Here's some vector databases I'm familiar with. And here's how we might go ahead and build this thing. That can put you in a more leadership position within your company, team, organization, whatever, because you're actually learning how to do this stuff. Learning this stuff is going to catapult a lot of people's careers in the near term future. The same way that if you learn something like AWS and Lambdas when it first came out, you became a person in a small group of people, right? There was actually a guy that I've talked to a bunch of times in the show, Brian Schuster, who learned a lot about Lambdas and became kind of an expert at a time when there just weren't many experts. And this ended up getting him a really cool role at IBM. So this is the kind of benefit to being an early adopter. You get all the benefits of not having a lot of knowledge. You're still kind of making up the rules as you go along, and you get to be in a smaller group of people that have this knowledge. And level three is at the far end of these AI skills. This is the most deep and defensible side of this knowledge. And I would say that this is like doing data engineering and building the data pipelines, hosting models, all the data operations that are involved for AI tools, right? So if you're building on top of these tools, you're building something like RAG, or you're building an MCP server, or you're building agents, you're really just building on top of the large language model. You're not building your own large language model at all. You're doing mostly traditional software engineering, just with a different type of API. But if you're building the data pipelines that either train these models or they feed the RAG system that you're using, well, this becomes even more complex and the room and threshold for error is lower. And there's even less people that understand how to do this well, right? Like, how do you chunk and store the vectors? Do you need a vector database? Do you need hybrid search? Do you need sparse vectors, dense vectors? How are you going to surface this knowledge and keep it fresh and up to date? Or if your data science team is fine tuning a model for some really complex use case or some very niche use case, well, how are you handling that? How are you looking at the loss? How are you looking at the training data? How are you going to host this? Are you going to host it on your own server? Are you going to host it on OpenAI or Anthropic or something like that? Are you building your own models? Are you going to deploy them on Hugging Face? Whatever. There's all sorts of things that you're going to need to understand how to do, whether it's working with the data science team and doing mostly the DevOps and hosting the models, or it's actually building the models. This is for people with mathematical backgrounds or actual AI engineers, the people that are actually engineering the AI models. There's a lot of money to be made in this, but also there's just less positions. So I would definitely look into the data engineering side of this because I think there's a lot of room for growth here as people need to feed more and more data to these hungry models out there. Now, this stuff is pretty unsexy, but if you want to get your feet wet in here, if you're a full stack developer, let's say, or a front end developer, I think what you could do is you could set up a pretty simple data pipeline to feed to a RAG system, right? You could do something like scraping online using Firecrawl or Crawl for AI. These are two really popular libraries for crawling and scraping the web specifically for large language models. Learning how to use these and dump this data into a vector store or SQL or however you want to surface the data, that could be a really good learning opportunity for you. And then you can also use that to move further towards data engineering, maybe if you're coming from a full stack or front end background. And just to be clear, none of this stuff replaces fundamentals. In fact, I had a guy that I spoke to on the phone a few days ago that found me through TikTok, of all places. He says, "Hey, man, I want to get into your AI engineering program." I'm like, "Oh, cool. You're a software developer." He's like, "No." And I'm like, "Oh, do you know how to code?" "No." I'm like, "Well, sorry to tell you, man, as much as I'd love to take your money, I can't do that ethically, right? Or practically, because there's just no way you would know how to do any of this stuff. In the program that I run, we write scripts to upload a ton of data into a vector store. We're building a full stack application we're going to deploy. I expect students to come back with their own plan about what they're going to build, the data sources, how they're going to collect it, whether they're using Python or Rust or TypeScript. It doesn't matter, but you do need to know how to write code or build software. If you don't, it's just all completely foreign stuff. There's no world that I see in now or the near future in which you just don't need to know how to do anything with code or deploy stuff or understand the basics of the software development life cycle. So if you're a developer, hopefully that makes you feel good. And if you're not one, I don't think that excludes you. I just think that some of these things are just going to be way outside your depth. And you should probably stick to doing things like vibe coding or even dipping your feet into this a little bit. But I don't think you're going to become a data engineer or be building really complex MCP servers or RAG systems with some prompting that you could do from Claude. I just don't think that's reality. But hey, prove me wrong. I don't know. Now, out of these three areas, I'd say numbers 1 and 2 are the most accessible and approachable for software developers. And if you do these things right now, like there is a time window that I'm like really certain of, right? At some point, like in the 2010s, the web exploded. And the people that got into React or AngularJS like I did or whatever, right? Ember even, those people became really valuable and they found a lot of opportunity out there for them. And the people that didn't, they found they had to just learn it later. And then it became table stakes. It wasn't interesting or cool to know React anymore. It was just a given. I do believe that in the next 5 to 10 years or so, or less probably, this is going to become table stakes stuff too. People are going to expect you to know a little bit about RAG. They're going to expect you to understand a little bit about how to construct agents and probably have some familiarity with MCP, right? I just think these things are going to become table stakes. So if you're getting in now, this is the time, in my opinion, to do so. And because I like you, I have a free project in the show notes that you can use. That's free. It's all yours. That'll teach you the basics of RAG. And I have another one if you want to go a little bit deeper that's going to teach you how to build an agent that can perform SQL queries. I hope you find that useful. And if you are one of those vibe coders that swears that you can actually build all this stuff, I'd love to see it. Hit me up and let me know how dumb I am and what you've built and why no one needs to learn how to code anymore. I love hearing those stories. They really brighten my day. See you around.